this and share. All right. Share audio. All right, so first breaking the system into planes of movement. So our body is like sliced in half in divisions. Think about a plane of glass. You're sliding your body, your arms on that plane of glass. It's not the movement in the half of division, but it's like literally if she had a towel in her hand, she's buffering this table, waxing on this table. So doing rotation, she's on this table. If you had a plane of glass down in between her, up and down, it's going to divide her into left and right halves, but she can only move on this plane. So bringing the arm into flexion, bringing the leg into flexion, right? Bringing the head forward. If I divide the front and back, then you can only do like jumping jacks, right? So remember, it's not in the area, the space up and down. It's really the movement across this like literal glass plane.
When we want to describe motion of the human body, we need to identify the space on which that motion occurs. To do this, we divide the body into 3 different sections or planes: sagittal, transverse, and frontal. Today, Molly is going to be demonstrating these motions and how they occur on each one of these planes. The sagittal plane is a vertical plane cutting the body into left and right halves. So any forward and backward movement parallel to this plane occurs in the sagittal plane. Movements such as flexion and extension will occur in the sagittal plane. As you can see with this lunge movement that Molly is demonstrating, her body is moving front to back, flexing and extending at the hip and knee joint, therefore occurring in the sagittal plane. Also, an exercise such as a bicep curl would occur in the sagittal plane. The flexion movement at the elbow joint is running parallel to that invisible plane, again dividing the body into left and right halves. The frontal plane is a vertical plane that passes through the body, dividing it into anterior and posterior halves. Any lateral or side movement, moving towards or away from the midline, will be on the frontal plane. So movements such as adduction and abduction, or elevation and depression at the scapula, will occur on the frontal plane. For example, Molly's performing a jumping jack, which occurs on the frontal plane, since the movement of ab and adduction of the arms and legs is occurring parallel to that plane, moving towards and away from the midline. Additionally, Molly is also performing a lateral torso flexion. That would occur on the frontal plane since the movement of her torso is occurring parallel to that plane, again, which is dividing the body into anterior and posterior halves. Lastly is the transverse plane. This is a horizontal plane that divides the body or parts of the body into top and bottom halves. Anytime we rotate a joint, it occurs in the transverse plane. So movements such as rotation, pronation, and supination all occur in the transverse plane. For example, you can see that Molly is demonstrating an external and internal rotation of the humerus. Since this rotation at the shoulder joint is pivoting, it indicates it's on the transverse plane. A movement also like this torso rotation that Molly is demonstrating, the movement is running parallel to that invisible plane, which is cutting the body in half. Keep in mind that while it's helpful to define the 3 principal planes, many human movements do not occur in a single plane and usually cross 2 or more. As Molly is demonstrating a lunge with an upper body rotation, you can see it occurs in both the sagittal and transverse plane. To get a better idea of how the planes of motion work, try applying it to your everyday life. As you make movement.
Okay. So now we're going into all of the directional terms. So if you have, like, let's say a client comes in and they have like some sort of like lesion or something, or rash on their back or on their torso, you need to define, is it close to the shoulders? Is it down below, down near the belly button? So, having these different terms to describe the position of something on the body is going to be helpful. So when you read it, you know exactly where that place is. You know exactly where this trigger point is on the back. Even though you say like the muscle is a big, it might be a long muscle. So like the erector group, if you say there's trigger points, but if you are distinct and say it's on, T12 or something, or it's the trigger points are more cranial on the back towards the upper back or something, so just having these different descriptors are going to help you make better SOAP notes and describe things easier. And all right, here's a little video, and he has some like tricks and tips to kind of memorize these. They might help, they might not, but it's a little ditties he uses.
When you take anatomy and physiology, you're going to have to learn about the anatomical position as well as some basic directional terms. They may seem complicated at first, but they're super easy to learn, and I'm going to give you some tips for remembering them. First, let's talk about the anatomical position. It is a standing position with the head facing forward, the arms to the side, with the palms facing forward and the fingers extended and the thumbs pointing away from the body. The feet are spaced slightly apart with the toes pointing forward. And the anatomical position is pretty simple to learn. If you just look at the picture, maybe practice it yourself a few times, you'll probably get it. But the way I remember it is I kind of picture someone walking out into a parking lot and they see someone spray painting graffiti on their car and they're just like, dude, what are you doing to my car? And that's basically the anatomical position. Now, it's really important for you to learn the anatomical position for a few different reasons. First of all, this is the standard perspective that everyone is going to use when they're referring to anatomy or the directional terms. So for example, let's say someone has a wound on the anterior side of their forearm. You don't have to guess which way their arm is twisted or which perspective someone's using. Everything is going to be from the perspective of the anatomical position. And this is the anterior side in the anatomical position, so you know that the anterior side of the forearm is always going to be the front side of their forearm. This is always going to be the left hand. This is always going to be the right hand, and so forth. Next, anatomy is definitely one of those courses where the concepts continue to build on themselves as you progress. So for example, if you learn now that superior means toward the head or above, and inferior means away from the head or below, it's going to help you out when you study the heart a few chapters later and see the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. You're going to know that one's above and one's below. And then finally, if you are a health science major and plan to become a nurse or doctor, then you are going to be using these directional terms and the anatomical position when you document and things like that. Now here's an important tip for learning the directional terms. They are usually grouped in pairs of opposites. So if you can learn the meaning of at least one of the directional terms in each pair, you can easily remember the meaning of the opposing directional term. Let's take a look at the first pair of our directional terms. We have superior, also called cranial, which means toward the head end of the body, or higher or above. And you can remember this easily because the head of a company is your superior at work. He or she holds a higher position than you do, so they are above you in authority. And inferior means just the opposite. This term is also sometimes called caudal, and it means away from the head, or lower, or under, or below. An inferior product has a lower quality material compared to the other product. So let's apply these terms to the body. My eyes are superior to my nose is superior to my mouth is superior to my neck is superior to my chest is superior to my navel, or you could say it the other way. You could say my navel is inferior to my chest is inferior to my neck is inferior to my eyes, and so on. The next pair of directional terms relate to the front or back of the body structure. Anterior, also called ventral, means front of or in the front. Your abdominal muscles are on the anterior side, and the easy way to remember that, abs are anterior. The word ventral literally means belly, by the way. Now your posterior or dorsal is going to be just the opposite. It means the back of, or behind, or on the back. And this is easy to remember because the posterior is another word for your rear end, which is on your backside. So on an exam, you might see a question asking you something like this. The sternum is blank to the spine. Well, you would know that the sternum is anterior to the spine. It is in front of the spine. Or you could say that the abdominal muscles are anterior to your intestines. Or you could say that the spine is posterior to your abdominal muscles. Or that your heart is posterior to your pectoral or chest muscles, and so on. Next, we have distal and proximal, which relate to the attachment point or origin of a structure to your body, such as your arms and legs attaching to your trunk. Distal means away from or farthest from the attachment point of the structure. You literally go the distance with distal. And proximal is the opposite of distal. It means closest to or nearest the point of origin of the structure, such as your limb in relation to your trunk. And just think of the word approximately, and you'll remember that it means close to the insertion point of the trunk relative to the other object you're referring to. Now, people sometimes get confused on these two directional terms, so let me give you a couple points to help you keep in mind. First of all, it's talking primarily about the limbs, so your arms and your legs. That's what you're talking about when you're talking proximal and distal. Second of all, it's referring to the attachment point. Okay, so the point where the arm attaches to the trunk or the leg attaches to the hip and so forth. So distal is going to be distant, proximal is going to be closest to this attachment point, and an easy way to remember this is to take your hand, make it into the shape of a gun, and remember this phrase. The pistol is distal to the upper arm. So if you remember that, it'll keep you straight. So let's go over a few examples. In the anatomical position, my phalanges or fingers would be distal to the carpals. The carpals would be distal to my elbow. My elbow would be distal to my upper arm. Or you could say it the other way. You could say my upper arm is proximal or closest to this attachment point compared to my elbow. Or my elbow is proximal to my wrist. Or my wrist is proximal to my phalanges or fingers. The next pair of directional terms refer to the position of a structure relative to the body's surface. These are easy to remember because they are common words that we all use. Superficial or external means nearest to the surface or outside of the body. In fact, if you take letters from the word superficial, you can actually spell surface. If a person is superficial, it means they only care about outside appearances. They only care about the surface of something. Deep or internal means just the opposite. It is away from the outside of the body, away from the surface. A deep wound is going to penetrate far below the surface of the skin. As you can see in this image, the liver is deep to the rib cage. The skin is superficial to the liver. The heart is also deep to the rib cage, or the bones would be deep to the skin, or the skin would be superficial to the muscle or superficial to the bone. Finally, we have terms that refer to a structure's location relative to the midline of the body. Medial means toward the midline of the body, and that's easy to remember because medial sounds a lot like middle, and that's exactly what it's talking about. A structure is toward the middle of the body, and lateral means away from the body's midline. And lateral is easy to remember because a popular exercise to work out your shoulder muscles is something called lateral raises, where you take the weights and you literally lift them away from the middle of the body. And the word intermediate means between two structures. So the humerus, or the bone in the upper part of the arm, would be lateral to the sternum, which is more toward the midline of the body, or the sternum would be medial to the humerus, or your knee would be intermediate between the ankle and the hip. Okay, so that wraps up this video on the anatomical position and the directional terms. Now, I do have a free quiz.
All right. It takes practice, but just remembering on the extremities, you're going proximal to distal. In reference to the midline, to the spine, if it's closer to the spine, it's medial. If it's farther away from the spine, it's lateral. So those are the two distinctions between the extremities, arms and legs, and then the actual torso. All right, so review of the joint movements from kinesiology.
Hey everyone, this is Ben with registerednursern.com, and in this anatomy lesson, I'm going to cover...
Actually, never mind. That's 23 minutes. I got a lot to go through. So we're gonna go to the next. All right. So anatomy is literally the study of all of the structures of the body and their like position in the body and kind of how they all like, well, kinesiology is really how they all work together, but we want to know how each individual part works. So then when you get into pathology, it's like, how is that part not working correctly? Or how is the sequence of parts not working together? Okay, so we want to have homeostasis. We want the body in balance. So we want everything working together in unison, right? If something goes awry, we want to look at that individual thing or organ system, but we also want to take into account how is that affecting the other systems. In the Western model, we focus too much on breaking up the body and only seeing the neurologist, but the neurologist doesn't talk to the gastroenterologist or the cardiologist. So if one section is off, more than likely other parts of the body are going to be affected negatively. So we need to look at all of that. So, understanding how each system works. When you have a client that comes in and they have certain medications or certain symptoms, you can say, "Oh, I recognize this. This looks like this pathology or this condition," even though it's not in your scope of practice to diagnose. You can still refer them to a physician. I'm seeing this. I think you should go see your primary care. I'm seeing this. I think you should go see a chiropractor or whatever. Or this condition might be happening. So just, kind of not warning them, but giving them the awareness of something that you see that they might see because they see their body every day. They might not be able to look in the mirror on their back. And if you see some sort of skin condition, you say, "Hey, there's this skin condition on your back or this mole that's getting bigger. So why don't you go see, the doctor about it?" So in order to really break down and make the naming of the body parts not gibberish, putting it more into colloquial language is going to be easier. So looking up the etymology or the breakdown of how the words are put together and where they come from, most of them are based from a Greek or Latin word root that is then can be translated into modern day English. But of course, to make it easier, everybody uses the Greek and Latin terminology, because if somebody doesn't speak English, it's going to be easier to have like one term for the body. So if you go to India and get surgery or something like that, it's not confusing of what they're doing. So everything has to have like a base. So in order to make a word, you need to have different parts of the word. So the actual root word, and then you're going to have the prefix on the beginning to describe it, and then a suffix at the end to describe it as well. So kind of having two descriptors in one main word, right? So the cardio meaning heart, logy meaning like the study of, so the study of the heart. Polyneuropathy, so poly meaning many, neuro referring to the nervous system or the brain or the nerves, and then pathy meaning kind of a condition of, or like the pathway of something. So like a mini nerve pathway. So something is going on with many nerves, right? So if you can understand how to break down the words, then on the imblex, when they ask you a question and it has this word in it and you're like, "Man, I don't know what that word means," or "I've never seen it," or "It's just, I forgot, that word," you can actually break down the word, and then the multiple choice answer will be easier to answer because you know that you can eliminate certain choices based off the parts of the word. Okay. All right. So now we're getting down into how the body is built. So how we are built from a little tiny molecule into an actual human. Right? So we're going to start with atoms. Then atoms come together and make molecules, make our DNA. And then that DNA is our blueprint to make individual cells. Muscle cells, bone cells, skin cells, nervous cells. So this blueprint makes an individual cell. Then the cell goes into a grouping, and then it actually makes tissues. Right? So you got the epithelial tissue, skin, you got fascia, connective tissue, ligaments, tendons, muscular tissue, and you got nervous tissue. Then when you have all of these tissues together, when they build upon each other, they then create a more complex structure, which is a organ system or a organ, right? And then you put different organs together, and then it turns into a system, an organ system. And then you put all the organ systems together, and then it makes up a living human, frog, cat, whatever. Right? So that's how we are built. So understanding that each cell has a nucleus, has its own function and its own communication, and it's going to talk to the other cells in other parts of the body. All right, so now going into like a basic individual cell. Remember, it's self-sustaining. It's got its own function. It produces its own things. It eliminates waste. It allows other molecules to enter and exit the cell. So think of like a fish tank that has all these different types of fish. You got the sucker fish that are eating the algae. You got the shrimp eating the poop on the bottom. You got the larger fish kind of keeping guard, and then you have this water in between, and this flow of the pump keeping the water flowing. It filters out all the waste, and then the light comes in, and it creates more energy and all this. So it's a self-sustaining system. And then if you had this fish tank, let's say in a pool, and then you had other fish tanks swim like kind of in the pool as well, this is going to make up our system, and it's going to do this multiple times. So having hydration is key to each individual cell having enough fluid to do its job, and keeping this matrix in between, this fluid in between, to help all the cells have enough space to do what they need and communicate and talk. These cells need building blocks, just like your house needs a building block to create the brick or the wood flooring or the sheetrock, like the metal in the wiring. So in order to have those building blocks, we need to digest food and uptake certain minerals and elements to create different functions in our body. Right? So natural things from the earth, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, all these things are needed to put in your garden to make your plants grow and your vegetables grow, and then you eat those vegetables, and then you're taking in these nutrients, these elements, and then they're being used in your body to repair, to build new cells, new enzymes, and break down things and boost your immune system. So keeping your giant amalgamation of molecules and cells and fish tanks like do their job. We also have trace minerals, right? Things from the earth and the ocean that we need. So you might have seen, I don't know if you're like into the health stuff, if you've seen trace minerals at like Whole Foods or Elwood Thompson or something, where you can actually put a few drops of concentrated seawater into your water, and it really gives you a boost of all of these nutrients. Because not like we don't always take in enough nutrients, even if we eat a organic whole food diet, like a plant-based diet as well. We're not getting enough of these nutrients because of the way agriculture has tilled the soil and pulled up all of these nutrients. It's kind of depleted of these things. So we can eat like sea kelp, seaweed, have these trace minerals and things, and it's going to help our body do its proper function. Right, calcium helping for not only bones but blood clotting, muscle function, so forth. So each of these have a certain thing that it needs to do. Hemoglobin, we know that in the cardiovascular system we have this red blood cell. This red blood cell needs to carry oxygen from the heart to every finger and toe, right, to every cell in the body. So it's got the hemoglobin. I think of the Green Goblin in Spider-Man. He's riding on top of this disc, this hoverboard, and he's going to the lungs and he's picking up oxygen molecules and bringing them down to each cell. If we don't have iron in our diet, then we become anemic, and a person can be very fatigued and sluggish, and their brain's not working right. Their muscles can't function properly. So then a person has to supplement with iron pills or eat more red meat. There's ways to supplement that, but just know that like if we're lacking in even just one of these elements, then our body is not going to function properly. Same thing with iodine. Our thyroid needs to produce the T3 and T4. So our thyroid needs to help our immune system. So our targeting system for different pathogens and bacteria and stuff that are in our body. So if we don't take in enough iodine, that's why they have iodized salt, to help our body get enough of this iodine. Because if we're not eating natural sources of it, our body's not going to function properly. So there's ways for us to get it in. So like I said before, if you have a fish tank and you get all these different types of fish in the fish tank, if you drain the water out and they're all clumped together, they're not going to be able to swim around and do their job properly. So we need to make sure that our body is hydrated, our clients are hydrated. Just telling them to sip a small cup of water after the session is not going to do much, because if they're dehydrated, the water is going to go to where it's needed most, to the brain, to the heart, to the lungs, to the kidneys, like to all these places. And the last place it's going to go is to the skin and tissues, right? So it's going to go to the vital organs first. So encouraging your clients to hydrate on a regular basis, and you might even help them create a game plan on how to hydrate more. So there's different tips and tricks that we can do to help our clients hydrate more, and we can talk about that at a later date. But just understanding that if their tissues are dry and dehydrated, then your work is going to be much harder for you to do, because you're going to have to do more manual therapy to stimulate the body to create more hyaluronic acid and bring out more fluids to soften up and give more fluid to these cells and the cell tissues to be able to actually manipulate their body. So less work for you and less pain for them, because if they're dehydrated, their body's going to feel like it's like tearing paper, and it's not going to be comfortable for them. So hydration is key. All right, going down to the basic structures of one individual cell, how it works, how it functions, so forth. All right, first we have the cytoskeleton. So this is like the scaffolding. If any of you are from New York City, if you go to like Manhattan and you have these buildings being built and you walk under the scaffolding, like the metal bars with the plywood on top, like all that is a structure for the workers to stand on to then put up the bricks and the windows and the things on the building to actually build the building. So this is going to be the structure to actually hold the space open so that all the cells and fluids and things can actually flow around in between. Okay. And then like I said, things are coming in the membrane and coming out of the membrane. So it needs to have like a tight barrier. All right. Some cells have extensions on the outside that are going to feel around and absorb different nutrients. So like in your large intestine, you're going to have these microvilli that are going to come in here and they're going to absorb fat. They're going to reabsorb water to pull it into the system, into the bloodstream, right? So these individual skin cells might have these little cellular extensions on the end of them as well. So just like the cilia that, like now that we're in pollen season, the pollen's coming in our nose, and then we have mucus that actually coming in and is sweeping our nostrils to pull that pollen into our throat, kind of like, and we either hack it up or we swallow it, and so this debris doesn't get into our lungs and into our bloodstream and system. So this is a way for our body to help protect any sort of debris coming in when we're breathing. Yeah, and then the flagellum. So we got the cilia, which is like this hair stuff that kind of sweeps the mucus. Then we got flagella that actually like a tail, kind of like the sperm that has a tail to actually swim, right? Then you got the membrane that actually encases it. So like the actual glass casing of the fish tank, but think of it being semi-permeable. It's going to allow things in and not allow the water and things out of the system. So it's going to have these kind of channels here, these doors where this outside, whatever is on the outside, nutrients and minerals, things that they want to come in, it's got to have the right kind of locking key, and then it'll allow these into these proteins, these channels here. But some things won't be able to get in, like this thing here. All right, so cytoplasm is the watery, goopy stuff. So if you think of, let's think of like you're making Jello, and you put the packet of Jello in the water, and you're mixing it up, and then you wait like a minute or two, and it's thickening, but it's not as viscous. It's not the hard Jello jigglers yet. So this is kind of how this works. It's like it's not totally liquid, but it's a little bit more viscous to allow these cells to move around. But if they want to stay in place, they can just kind of sit there and not move around a lot. So if they're not moving a lot, and the person is dehydrated, these cells are going to be stuck together more. So when we go in there and do the petrissage and the compression and the pin and stretch and all that stuff, we're actually moving this fluid through the body to help these cells get more hydration and move around and have more space to do their job. Okay. So all these different organelles are within this cytoplasm, this fluid, inside of like the cell here. So all these little things you see here, all this fluid inside, keeping this fish tank, big enough to have all these things move around. All right, then we have the endoplasmic reticulum. So this is sacs that's actually going to kind of like a factory that's going to build different things. It's going to synthesize things. So kind of like on the table, buddy. Bring it to me. So kind of like a 3D printer, you're putting in what you want to build, and then you hit start, and then it's going to actually scan and actually duplicate and build what you need. So this is going to, the RNA is going to come in here, and it's going to go into the ribosomes. They're going to make proteins and all these things, and then the cell is going, no, the controller, buddy. The cell is going to make, going to send the blueprint to make fats, to break down carbs and steroids. So this is like literally like a self-sustaining workshop inside of the cell. All right, ribosomes, think ribs. You eat ribs, you eat meat. So this is going to actually, the DNA is going to send out the RNA, and then that's going to tell the ribosomes what kind of proteins to make, and it's going to literally just like push them out, and then those proteins are going to be used either within the cell, or then they're going to go outside of the cell and travel to some other part of the body to be used. So like if you skin your knee, your body has to produce more skin cells. You might tear some fascia or some muscle, so your body has to build more muscle, right? We got mitochondria. This is our energy source, so our generators of the body. These use ATP. So this is the actual energy source of our body. Our body uses food, oxygen, and there's different processes. The Krebs system and all that stuff breaks it down, breaks fat down, breaks sugars down, and actually makes energy for our body to use the energy for the cell to do its job. Lysosomes, think Lysol, killing things. So it's going to either eat or destroy pathogens in our body. Centrioles, you can think of like a sentry, guards that are going to help ensure that when the cell starts creating new proteins or new cells within itself, it's going to be able to be transported and really function properly, kind of come out the other side whole and not be damaged, not have anything wrong with it, right? So that's kind of how that works. And of course, the nucleus is going to be the epicenter, the main mothership that's going to be sending the blueprint and the signals out to the rest of the cells for them to do their job. All right, this is our genetic code for each individual cell. All right, then we have different processes, which I'm not going to get into much now because it'll take too long. But we have different ways that the molecules move in and out of the cell, right? Like I said before, they have different kind of like locks and keys where it's transported once that key goes into the lock and the door opens and it comes in. And there's different ways for them to just kind of come through the cell or not come through the cell in different ways, right? So this is more of a thing. Okay. Yeah, again, this is how it moves through, which I don't know if this is more like advanced stuff. I don't know if we're going to be covering this in this time because it's just such a short time. So I want to give you like the majority, kind of like an overview. All right, types of tissue. We got blood tissue, we got bone tissue, we got epithelial, we got cartilage, right? We got connective tissue, muscles, nervous, and adipose fat. So the main thing that we're working with when you're touching somebody, you're touching the skin, which is connected to the connective tissue, right? Like the fascia, which is intertwined with receptors that are attached to the nervous system, which then goes to the brain and comes back to then come to the muscle tissue to tell the muscle tissue to contract and relax. The muscle tissue is then attached to the bone, of course. So if this is contracting and pulling, it's pulling on the bone. And if this is contracted, it's going to be squeezing and constricting the blood. Which then, if the bone and muscle tissue is too close together and the muscle is crossing a bone joint, then it's going to put pressure on the cartilage. So you see how like all these are intertwined. So when you work with somebody, you're not focusing on the muscle itself. You're focusing on everything around it that's actually compressing to control the muscle tissue function. Because if you took off all of the fascia and connective tissue, the tendons and all that, you would just have this blob of muscle. So having, big glutes, nice glutes and a triceps and all these things, it's literally the connective tissue that's forming around it to shape the actual muscles. We also have interstitial fluid. So remember, hydration is key. We have all this fluid that needs to be distributed evenly within the tissue cells. If somebody has swelling, edema, then like cankles, that's going to be too much fluid buildup in that area, and it needs to be drained out, but it's not draining out properly. So that's when we have the lymphatic drainage modality to help drain this fluid out and restore the natural function of the fluid or the balance of the fluid. So having too much fluid is not good. Having too little fluid is not good. So we want to encourage the body to maintain that homeostasis or that balance. So our epithelial tissue or our skin tissue, depending on the shape of it and how many layers there are, it's going to make up different parts of our body. Our arteries, our lungs, our genitals, or our reproductive system, if you will, and then our kidneys and things and digestive system. So all of these are the same, I guess, type of cell category, but they're different subtypes of cells: ciliated, simple squamous, simple cuboidal. So the body's broken down even deeper into each, like I said, each individual cell comes together, and then the more they come together, they actually make the organs and then the systems. Okay. We got a lot to cover within this time. So, all right. Our blood, most of it is plasma. Okay, so this is like a watery fluid. It holds all our proteins, electrolytes, different waste and things. Like there's so many things that are in here. Then we have 1% of our platelets and leukocytes. So platelets actually come in, and when there's a cut, it's going to come in and put spackle into that cut and block it so we don't bleed out. Then we have leukocytes. Think Luke Skywalker coming in with the lightsaber and the starships to come in and actually destroy any sort of pathogens, viruses, bacteria. Then we have erythrocytes, which is our red blood cells, which are carrying hemoglobin, or the green goblin that's carrying oxygen to our cells to help them produce energy and have function. The fluid that builds up, that interstitial fluid that I was talking about, is plasma. This fluid, so our vascular system, our blood vessels, are like semi-permeable. So they're going to kind of like sweat, kind of like a Coke bottle sweats. All that fluid on the outside is going to build up into our spaces in between the cells. Once that space builds up enough pressure, it's going to then drain into our kind of sewage system, which is our lymphatic system, and then that's going to be filtered and then go back to the heart and then go back into the plasma itself. Right. So that's super important. The more we can stimulate blood circulation and unkink the hose, the more the body's going to stay hydrated, because it's going to be able to flush the water back into the system. We got different shapes of muscle cells. Cardiac cells, because it needs to actually be in this cross section to pump really hard, pump the heart, so it contracts hard, right? But then skeletal muscle is long and striated, so it can actually go in length, stretch open into a length, and it contract into a small space. But the heart doesn't have that space to actually elongate and contract, but it needs to pump and squeeze hard enough to push all that blood and make the pressure hard enough to go all the way down, to the rest of the body. Then we have smooth muscle, which it doesn't have to contract as much like our cardiac or skeletal muscle, so it's going to be very smooth. It has to expand and kind of move as our stomach fills up, as our intestines push waste down. It needs to be able to kind of contract and relax a little bit and move, but it doesn't need the same strength as these other cells, right? So that's smooth muscle. But cardiac muscle needs to be very dense and contracted, because it's got to pump and squeeze so hard to pump the fluid or pump the blood to our body. And then our muscle cells, our skeletal muscles, are built up of these tiny little muscle fibers that come together and make a fascicle, or kind of a meat popsicle. And those come together and they actually make the actual muscle body. And then down microscopic, we have the actin and myosin, kind of like the linkages that you can think of a Chinese finger trap. And once those kind of come together, they contract. So think of like a giant rope made of tiny fibers. That's what makes our skeletal muscles so strong. Then we got nervous tissue, which makes a neuron, right? Each neuron communicates and sends a signal to the other neuron. Then it goes all the way down the spinal cord, and then goes to each cell or muscle to help it contract, right? So this is our wiring of our body, made up of individual wiring, wire cells here. Right. So like I said, the less fluid we have in our vascular system and the more constricted it is, the more our cells are going to clump together and not be able to function properly. The more fluid is going to be released, and the more edema we're going to have, swelling in there, because the fluid can't stay. Like I said, it's semi-permeable. It's going to increase blood pressure, so the heart's going to have to pump harder to kind of push all this stuff through. And then if it gets backed up too much, then we can kind of have embolism and blood clots, varicose veins. All this stuff happens when this system is not flowing properly. So working with your clients to help their body and joints and tissues open up so that all this can flow is the idea, versus just looking at, oh, there's a knot there, let's press on the knot. Like there's a bigger picture to manual therapy. All right, so we're at 8 o'clock. I know it's a lot of information. Any questions, concerns? I threw a lot at you, and this is going to be a lot in this mod, or in this class. But if I'm losing you, let me know, so I can kind of like go back, double back, and explain things.